All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the readings. We got two more left today and tomorrow. We will be finishing Shadowbound by reading Act 3. Today will be the first half of Act 3, chapters 20 to 22. And then tomorrow it will be 23 up until the end of the book, which is the epilogue. Yay! Stream! Woo! Just make sure you grab a snack, get cozy, get comfortable, and prepare for the climactic finale of my book. If you don't own a copy of the book, and you've been enjoying the readings and would like to get yourself a copy, there is a link to the Amazon store page in the description below or in the pinned chat message above. Feel free to also check out my Substack, where I'm writing about the Great War, a major event in Astrian history. If you would like to learn more about what Astria was like back in the ye olde days when wizards weren't as strong. And if you've missed a reading or two, there should be the reading playlist linked in the description as well. All of the readings will be free up until the sequel to Shadowbound is published. After that, everything past Chapter 7 will be for members only. But channel members only pay like $3. You can get all the readings. But they're going to be free for a while, so you don't have to worry about that just yet. And once again, Echo will be providing us entertainment. So if you have not thanked her yet, feel free to thank her now or at the end when we do the Q&A. The reading time today is expected to be just over an hour. Fairly short, but I didn't want to just start the final battle and then end it midway through. So today is going to be the lead up to the final battle. And tomorrow will actually be the climax. And also the ending, of course. You know, I remind myself of like a flight attendant on an airplane. Please return your chairs to the upright position and stow away your food tray. We will be taking off in 30 seconds. Thank you for your cooperation. All right. without further ado, let's get into the reading. Yeah, that's happening too. Alright. Act 3. Corridon. Chapter 20. Sand digs under Amber's fingernails and fills her shoes, making her feel extremely uncomfortable. Ethan climbs just 2 steps above her, and Lucre 2 steps below. Slowly, they scale the tall dune of loose sand. Where was Blaze? Amber can't help but ask. I don't know. The husk exasperates loudly. Amber presses her mouth tightly shut and fights the urge to try and shrink into herself, stomach churning in shame. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. They reach the crest of the dune and slide down towards the stone dais below, where the archway stands sideways in the sand. It almost appears like it's sinking, just slow enough to where she can't even notice. Ethan starts to dig around in his pockets, searching for something. Luke returns to her. What is happening? Oh, She pauses, thinking of how to break the news to him that they're dragging him along on a possibly dangerous mission. She doesn't know what Ethan wants to do with Brianna when they get to her, but... We're going to... well... We're leaving Mirage. Just as she says this, the archway thrums to life, and a rip opens in its center. Cold air blasts the small group, sending a sharp chill down Amber's back. Beyond the rift is a dark land, the buildings gray and lifeless, and the land barren and dead. Twisting trees loom in the distance, their leafless branches stretching high into the air, trying to reach the sky. A sky which is inky black, a swirling mass of storm clouds. Something heavy settles on Amber's chest, and she frees a hand to place over her heart. Lucre only gasps and shuffles closer to her for protection. Ethan turns to face them, his black eyes mirroring the land beyond. He holds a smooth, dark gray stone in his hand daintily, almost as if it'll break if he holds it too tightly. He sucks in a calm breath and says, We're going to Corridon. Amber's heart skips a beat. Corridon, the abandoned island. This is the first time she's ever seen it. It's okay. Ethan tries to reassure the other two. Despite the look, Aika is still safe, I think. Aika, that's the capital. Yes, it's been quite a while since she's had to think of anything related to Corridon. Aika is where the Corridon Archway is located. That's the place she can see through the rift, lifeless and still. And he's saying that it might be safe? She turns to Lucre and finds his gaze fixed to the rift, its darkness reflecting in his emerald green eyes. It's stunned, horror, surprise, wonder, too many emotions rolled into one expression, one where his mouth hangs open, fangs flashing in the mirage sunlight, and his eyebrows arch as high as they'll go on his forehead. Lucre? She asks softly, reaching for his arm. The Cerberus lets out a shaky breath when she touches him. He turns to look at her, his eyes wild. We're leaving Mirage, he asks slowly. The way he speaks each word, the way his emotions clash in his voice, it's clear that It's a sentence he never thought he'd ever consider saying. Amber offers him a sympathetic look. "Do you want to stay?" she replies. He stares at her in silence, then down at the sand underneath his feet. The chill of Corydon blasts them again, a powerful gust, wishing to be free from the dark land. It ruffles his hair for a moment. "Do I?" he mutters quietly. Slowly, Amber lets him go again. She looks to Ethan, who stares quietly at the young prince. His eyes flick to her, and he just shrugs, lost for words, just as she is. She steps away, her footfalls quiet in the sand. She clutches the spear close to her chest, eyes to the ground. "We shouldn't force him," she says to Ethan. He frowns. "I know why you want him along, but he's never left Mirage." "Right," he sighs. "We can't wait around long anyway." He adjusts his hat and turns away from Lucre. "Keep that spear with you. We can always give it back later. You first." He waves to the rift before them. Amber takes a deep breath, mustering her courage to approach the archway. Another cold blast streaks through her hair, pink strands whirling at the edges of her vision. She steps up to the rift, one foot in front of the other, spear held tight till her knuckles are white as snow. She can practically reach out and touch the rift, even pass through it if she wants. Something in the back of her mind tells her to run away and hide. That danger and evil lurk beyond in the darkness of the island. The low 1- and 2-story mud brick buildings seem intimidating, as if a shadow were to jump out at her and... "Come on, Amber," she encourages herself. "You've come this far already." She steps through the rift, passing through the thin barrier that separates the warm and inviting desert from the cold and unforgiving land of the ghost town beyond. The chill of the air pierces the fabric of her dust-covered robe and shirt. She inhales sharply in surprise, suddenly wanting to turn around and run back through to Mirage and lay in the sand for the rest of the cycle just to chase the chill away. The chill of suffering. "Lucre?" Ethan calls behind her, his voice carrying through the rip crystal clear, almost amplified. She turns around to stare back at the desert island, and at the Cerberus who stands with his feet dug into the sand and his head bowed. He looks up, at the rift and back at Amber, his gaze lost. Not really knowing what to do, she gives him a little smile and wave. Whatever it means, it's up to him to interpret. She doesn't know if she's waving goodbye, or giving him a little hello. He balls his hands into determined fists, however, as soon as she lowers her hand. I help," he stammers, having mustered the strength to speak. He holds up a hand, and sand swirls and forms into his jade sword. With it by his side, the prince puffs out his chest and strides towards the rift with purpose and dignity. The circlet on his head shines and sparkles, almost as if it's approving his choice. Amber holds out a hand through the rift, her palm getting one final taste of the Mirage sun. With a weak smile, he takes it, and she pulls him through to the other side. Ethan strides through not long after, and the rift closes. One last gust of Mirage's building warm air billows at them, and Lucre squeezes Amber's hand tight. "It's been too long," Ethan says with a small, Sad huff. He pockets the keystone and starts to the edge of the dais they stand on. Lucre holding her hand, the two slowly follow after him. The dais here is raised by a few steps, in the center of a rather large, circular square. Outdoor stalls with tattered rugs that used to act as roofs. Sitting spots and old wooden stands ringing the edge of the square itself. It kind of reminds her of the Cerberus town in a way, but with its own sort of character to it. Ethan, at the bottom of the dais, raises his voice, calling, "It's just me. I brought some friends." His voice echoes across the buildings and stretches into the distance. Then, the windows of thickly shadowed buildings light up, little red pinpricks appearing in pairs, all of them aimed down at the square and, chillingly, at them. Ethan half turns, though his gaze remains on the starry red darkness around them, a thin smile across his lips. And yet, seeing him so at ease, Amber's heart leaps unevenly as she grips her spear like it's her lifeline. All these shadows, there's at least 30 of them. Does Ethan know them? "Nightshade!" comes a cry, both cheerful and angry at the same time. A black form melts from the darkness, flanked by 2 guards. The 3 of them are Fenny shadows, though nothing like what Kimberly and Jake looked like, whereas those 2 had their appearances almost completely changed, with their outfits seemingly absorbing light as it shone on them. These shadows are painted with a series of lighter grays, dressed in simple armor pieces over top cloth clothing. The only thing these 3 have in common is a little white symbol on each of their right shoulders, the shape of which Amber can't clearly make out. The middle Fenny, presumably the one who called out before, has long, pointed ears and a bushy tail that sweeps side to side as she approaches Ethan, a sword hanging from a scabbard tied around her waist. She regards the husk with shining crimson eyes and a strange glower. "You took your time," the Fenny scolds firmly as she folds her arms, her voice strong-willed. Every word is projected for all to hear, like she were to suddenly start giving an inspirational speech before charging into battle. "I'm sorry, Tatcha, really," Ethan replies. "The council—" Tatcha cuts him off forcefully, pulling a sneer. "Those aging elects. How long were they going to let us keep defending Ica?" "In their eyes, Ica is gone. But before I could get them to take any action, I was forced to take my own." Ethan gestures to Amber and Lucre, and Amber shivers when Tatcha's eyes lock onto hers. "This is Amber and Lucre." "Can they fight?" Tatcha asks, as if she weren't even staring at them right now. "Amber's a healer, and Lucre knows light magic." Tatcha taps a finger on her arm impatiently. She studies Amber up and down, her cold gaze washing over her, before moving to Lucre, her frown frozen to her face. Lucre stiffens, sucking in a sharp breath as the shadow's eyes flicker across his body. Then she turns back to Ethan. "There's one you should see," she says finally. Ethan tilts his head. "I thought there weren't any untwisted left." Tatcha just nods behind her, then begins walking away. Ethan turns to Amber and Lucre, motioning for them to follow, and starts after the shadow and her entourage. Squeezing her hand, Lucre trails a step behind Amber as they, too, follow in silence, vividly aware of the red stares around them. "What's going on?" Amber asks Ethan. The husk lets out a long sigh. Tatcha is the de facto leader of the Feni. The shadows that live here in Icon now are the only ones left free from Riona's total control. Untwisted, meaning that they've kept their original forms. So, what's a twisted then? You've seen a twisted shadow already. 2 of them. Amber frowns to herself. We have? Kimberly and Jake, Ethan clarifies simply. They're larger, darker, stronger, and easier to control. They started as experiments to see if there was a better way to keep a shadow subservient. She's tried other ways in the past. The binding contract was her earliest experiment. His hand strays to his gauntlets as he speaks. The second experiment was through enchantments, which is why I know enchanting so well. You've seen my dorm room, Amber. Amber nods, recalling the mass of painted black runes adorning the walls of the odd dorm room she slept in that one time, many cycles ago. Still, Ethan gestures to Tatcha and the other 2 Feni guard, particularly to the Feni's right shoulders, and continues. She called it branding, though the most that could be done was simply imprinting a set of instructions onto the shadow. And then her third and most successful experiment has been twisted shadows, altering the very essence of the shadow itself, to the point to where its previous identity is forgotten, and it derives its purpose from the one that twisted it. Oh, Lucre mutters sadly. Ethan nods slowly, his gaze dark. It's not a process you want to experience, let alone know the details of. Tearing is not usually painful, but twisting is agony. In any case, Ica is the last place on Corridon where shadows live in relative freedom, I guess you can say, though they can't leave the island. They reach the end of the uneven cobble street, Red Eyes following them their entire journey, and step onto the start of a dirt road. The road itself is marked with white dust, the ground either side of it a dark brown, almost black in color. There, Tatcha waves to the right, at a large fenced area of ground. Amber gasps in surprise, just as the ground begins to vibrate strongly. Large vines begin to weave themselves through the ground, waving up and down, pushing the dirt around. And standing at the other end of these vines, green light surrounding him, is the shadow of Blaze. Something stirs deep within Amber's gut, a sickening feeling as she lays her eyes upon the wizard who threatened her freedom and insulted her, all because of her being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Amber? Lucre asks, drawing her attention. As she turns to look at him, she becomes aware of her deep and frantic breathing almost instantly. Her heart pounds in her chest. He stares back at her with a look of concern. You okay? Amber breathes, pausing to let herself calm down. Yes. Tilling? Ethan asks. Tatcha nods. We should keep the land fresh for when we wake, no? And when did he show up? If I must guess, he's only been here a couple of cycles. though we've been putting him and his magic to good use. She waves at the patch of land to prove her point. Hey, Ethan! It's Blaze's voice, one that makes Amber's shoulders rise and with swirling unease. It's cheerful. She doesn't believe that he's cheerful. The shadow gives them a wave from across the field, vines shrinking below the dark surface of the dirt once more, tremors ceasing. He strides over the tilled dirt with a beaming grin. His smile can't help but make her hate him even more. Blaze leans over the fence, balancing on his hands and tiptoes. The tilling's done, Tatcha. Thank you. Tatcha nods. So, Eth, Blaze begins to hum, though his cheery mood falters immediately as horror lights in his red eyes. Eth, what happened to your arm? Ethan blinks once, stunned at his question, as he raises his right arm to inspect it. Oh. His voice is quiet, surprised even. From his wrist to his elbow, a single long line of black stains his pale skin, with a second cutting down the middle of his forearm. The gauntlet is most definitely torn, with small strings of frayed fabric sticking up into the air, beginning to slowly unravel on its own accord. Slowly, his hollow expression morphs into horror as pain glows in his wide eyes. Instinctively, Amber reaches out to him and wraps her hand around just the very edge of his cut. Ethan, in response, grits his teeth and keeps back a yell, morphing it into an extremely restrained grunt. Gold glitter sparkles from Amber's fingertips as her magic surges forward. The glow of the glitter rushes along his injury, even spreading to the vertical cuts as well. And now, in place of black, sparkling amber light takes its place. Amber lifts her hand hesitantly and steps away from him. Tatcha, Blaze, and Lucre stare at her, stunned, unsure what to make of what just happened. Sorry, she mutters, her first reaction to the staring. But she's not sorry in the slightest. Is it better? Wordlessly, Ethan runs his fingers across his glowing arm. The pain he had been feeling mere moments before, now completely gone. He nods slowly, replying to her question, and her chest flutters with relief. What happened? Tatcha asks firmly, breaking the silence. An attack, Amber replies. Lucre nods. Bad shadows showed up. The Fenny glowers at the two, her gaze distant. Riona got the other two, didn't she? Blaze asks. Ethan nods, dropping his arm. She did. The ground trembles beneath their feet as Blaze balls his hands into tight fists. Like Tatcha, his anger doesn't appear directed at any being present, but at the wizard in the distant castle. I should have... Ethan starts. Eth... Blaze interrupts him firmly. Don't start with that. It wasn't your fault. Ethan clenches his jaw in silent protest, his eyes falling to the ground. The shadow shakes his head and turns back to Amber, though his expression is softer this time. Hey. Amber's entire face twitches, locked into a confused fight to portray anger or hurt back at him. Didn't think I'd see you here, she manages to mutter. Blaze rubs the back of his neck and musters a weak grin. Me neither. And who's that? He nods towards Lucre standing next to her. Lucre grins at his question. I am Lucre, from Mirage. He doesn't speak very well, Amber adds. And this is Blaze, one of Ethan's other friends. Tatcha clears her throat, drawing every being's attention. No doubt you have returned to finally take care of the lady. Ethan nods. I have. Do you have a plan? No, but Blaze has one. Blaze can't help but let out an amused huff. I do. Is there a place we can stay a spell? Ethan asks. Of course. Tatcha gestures back towards the buildings. Let me show you. Ethan can't exactly say he's happy to be back on Corridon. On one hand, it's nice to be with Tatcha and the other shadows of Ica again. Plus, it's a place he's pretty much lived all his life. On the other, he's not missed the heavy atmosphere, the dark clouds above that block out the stars, and the dreadful chill that permeates the air. And not only did he come back injured, but with a ruined gauntlet as well. Faces peer at them from the darkness of the buildings, glowing red eyes silent and ever watching, making his skin crawl. The sharp noise of his shoes hitting the stone beneath his feet ring out up and down the street. Along with Amber's and Lucre's, the place fills him with this deep sadness that makes his chest constrict. Tatcha leads them into one of the homes close to the archway, gesturing to the dark gray space. Make yourselves at home. There are dusty stone chairs around a single aged table, the cracks of time very apparent. Two young shadows stand in the darkest corner of the single room, staring at them with wide eyes, hesitant and curious at the same time. Their tails curl around each other protectively, and their ears hang low. Ethan drifts over to them slowly and kneels to meet their eyes. Are you two here alone? He asks them gently. One of them nods furiously back at him. The other attaches themselves to their sibling tightly. He can only smile apologetically. I'm sorry. Is it okay if we stay here for a spell? The shadows say nothing and remain still as statues, simply staring back at him with their wide eyes. Sadness and anger only well up inside him the longer he stares back. These young Fenny don't deserve to be stuck as shadows for as long as they have been. We won't be long. Sure, one of them finally whispers. Go play outside for a bit, he suggests. The two siblings nod and dash into the darkness, disappearing from view. When he turns to face the rest of the room, he finds Amber and Lucre already sitting quietly, with Blaze leaning against the wall a few steps away from them. Tatcha lingers in the doorway as well, but her entourage has left. All four of them stare at him expectantly, because he knows their enemy better than any other being currently present. And suddenly he finds this massive weight resting on his shoulders, pressing him down into the ground. His body feels hollow, as it always has, lifeless and emotionless. He looks down at his injured arm, and the glowing glitter that fills it. The edges are beginning to draw together, closing the rift Kimberly and Shadow created. But his gauntlet is starting to fall apart, just barely keeping itself together with the few intact threads it has. He doesn't have much time before it completely falls apart. He clamps his other hand down around the unraveling gauntlet and lets out a heavy sigh. Well, Blaze, can you run us all through the plan? Of course. Blaze nods, stepping forward to take his place next to Ethan. When he turns to face Amber, Lucre, and Tatcha, his expression is firm and assertive. I've learned quite a fair bit since arriving here in Ica, so the initial plan has changed slightly. Blaze continues confidently. Corridon has a path that rings the island, and a center path that leads directly from Ica to the castle. Originally, I wanted to use the ring path to reach the castle, as I figured that the center path would be well guarded just because of how short and direct it is from the archway. However, shadows are more likely to gather in towns all the same as where they once lived, as when they were once alive. Tatcha steps in. Simply put, going around the outside of the island is rather foolish. Riona wouldn't leave the center route unguarded, though, Ethan adds. She'll probably put her strongest shadows there just to make sure it's secure. At least that's what I'd advise her to do. Actually, Pravin was completely empty, Blaze replies. Ethan frowns at him. Pravin is the nexus town at the heart of Corridon, which leads to every other town on the island. Usually he'd assign a couple of shadows to Pravin, just in case any beings were to wander down the road. Why would Riona recall them and leave the town abandoned? What? He breathes. Blaze nods. When I escaped the castle, I passed through Pravin. No being was there to stop me. Ethan's scowl deepens. It's either a very smart or very stupid move. Maybe Riona just has her shadows spread thin with what is essentially her war effort in Mirage, leaving Pravin unguarded as a result. Maybe she's betting on an invasion at any given time, and assumes that a strike force wouldn't go down the center pathway due to the very same logic he used. So she's leaving Pravin open so she can use those shadows for other things. Or maybe she's inviting them to come to the castle. Going through Pravin is our best bet right now. It's the fastest route and most likely still safe up until Eros. Eros is definitely well guarded, Ethan states. We'll deal with Eros when we get there, Blaze replies nonchalantly. Just don't wander into the empty fields, Tatcha advises. You'll be begging for a fight that way. The other four nod. When are we going, then? Amber asks softly. As soon as we can, Blaze replies, straightening himself and rolling his shoulders. The cycle has just started. It'd be best to get to the castle before nightfall, right? Ethan nods. Though the clouds do provide the shadows a slight edge during the light, they'll become extremely dangerous once night falls. I wish you all luck, Tatcha speaks, looking around the room at the ragtag team. I must stay here with the other shadows to make sure no surprises befall us. Her eyes eventually land on Ethan, and a slight smile tugs at the corner of her lips. It's nice to see you finally take some action. It's been a long time coming. Ethan nods back at her. Lucre rests his jade sword on his shoulders, puffing out his chest confidently. Amber holds her spear as firmly as she can, trying to appear ready for the journey ahead of them, though her eyes betray her anxiety. Blaze simply smiles, and Ethan can't help but smile back. At least he's not alone. Chapter 21. With the castle looming high in the sky, the four set off on the path forward. Ethan steals a glance behind him to see the shadows of Ica gathered in the windows, atop buildings, and standing in the street, all watching them go. Blaze pats his shoulder. They all want us to succeed. Ethan forces a light chuckle, trying to get his nerves out. He knows that already. They've been waiting on him for far too long. He doesn't wish to entertain the thought of failing them, as at this stage, this has to go well, or else he'll never be able to live with himself. The dead environment around them is eerily silent. All the fields and orchards they pass are completely bare. No grass, no leaves, and not even any remnants of rotten fruits and vegetables. The bark of the trees are ashen and hard. The sky only adds to the dreary atmosphere, with black lightning crackling through the clouds that spiral out from the very tip of the castle's tallest point. Ethan twists his gauntlets uncomfortably, though stops once he feels the splitting fabric on his right wrist. His skin begins to prickle with phantom gazes. Distant whispers begin to tickle his ears, the past trying to push its way forward, and he grits his teeth to keep the voices at bay. The silence is starting to get to him. They continue on, their footsteps the only noise that fills the emptiness of the island around them. It's always a sad sight for him, walking through the results of his own doing. Not that he wanted to turn Corridon into a lifeless land. It's just all so surreal. Every single time. Amber twirls her spear slowly, careful not to hit Lucre next to her. The prince laughs as he watches her, amused. No, he states, and Amber stops her spear spinning. He reaches for the weapon, saying, "Better way to do it." She relinquishes the spear to the prince with a sigh. Lucre holds the spear with both hands for a moment, staring down at it, as if marveling at its craftsmanship once again. Then, without warning, he holds it out in front of him and spins it so fast that the silver shaft becomes a circular blur. Wow, Amber breathes as Lucre brings the spear to a stop once more. Practice, Lucre smiles. Look! While Ethan can't exactly see what Lucre is doing with his hands, Amber watches intensely. As Lucre slowly rotates the weapon once more. When the tip is once again facing the sky, he hands it back to her. Try it. Ethan watches quietly, and for a moment he is able to forget about the dead land that surrounds them. Laughter fills the air as the two play around. Something inside him flutters, his chest filling with warmth. He can practically smell the grass of the fields, freshly trimmed and covered with dew, as the light of the news cycle beams down on them from somewhere high above. Children scream with delight as the farmers tend to their crops and livestock. Kava stumble around on their stubby legs, leathery skin practically gleaming in the light of the cycle as they dip their heads down to eat. And the road is lined with flowering trees as they prepare themselves to bear fruit. Amber and Lucre turn into Riona and Shadow. "I've never been to Corridon before," Riona breathes, looking around in awe. "It's been a while since I've been back," Shadow laughs alongside her. "Well, now that we're here, when are you going to start teaching me shadow magic?" Shadow shakes its head. "We're not there just yet." "What are you thinking about, Eth?" Blaze asks, his voice cutting through the singing. The memory fades back into the emptiness of Corridon, with Amber and Lucre passing the spear between each other. "The past," Ethan only replies. Blaze hasn't gotten used to being a shadow at all, living on an island where everything is in shades of gray and black and dead. Corridon only makes him feel sad. There are so many things he has to wrap his head around. Amber not liking him, Lucre not knowing him, and Ethan, he doesn't know how to describe it, but just being around Ethan makes him feel more complete. Like he's suddenly been given some sense of direction and purpose on this drab island. "So, Blaze," Ethan says, "how did you manage to escape Riona?" Blaze rolls his shoulders back to puff out his chest, his pride swelling. "The floor was cracked, and it was easy for my vines to break through when she was trying to twist me. She wasn't prepared for my attack, and I was able to escape in the chaos." Ethan lets out a snort of amusement, and a smile creeps across his mouth. A strong wave of euphoria washes over Blaze at his friend's happiness. "You haven't been branded yet, have you?" Ethan then asks. "No." His friend hums, his smile disappearing in an instant. "When we reach Praven, that will change." Blaze frowns, unsure how to feel about it, yet reluctant to voice resistance. He doesn't think he needs branding in the first place, at least not the kind that the other Shadows of Ica have. Their magical abilities are limited, which means they couldn't brand Blaze himself, and they can't leave through the archway without explicit permission. It's not like Blaze could leave either. He tried to use a keystone, taken from a Fenny body, but nothing happened. He wouldn't be surprised if shadows can't use the archway, or if the runes on the archway have been altered to explicitly prevent shadows from using it. No matter what, he was stuck on Corridon. Blaze looks up at the pathway in front of the small group and sees the road begin to tilt downwards. It's a rather gentle slope, though steep enough to be noticeable. Up ahead, however, there is a rather steep decline, almost as if they're approaching a cliff. Beyond the decline is a rather large hole, with other roads leading to and from in 5 more directions. Praven is just up ahead, Ethan announces, sounding neither happy nor upset about it. What happened to the land? Amber breathes in wonder and worry. Ethan smiles weakly and chuckles to himself. It's a cannon crater dating all the way back to the Great War. Praven has always been a rest stop between Ica and every other town on Corridon. before and after it was rebuilt. They approached the edge of the crater with caution, huddling closely together. As one, they reached the crater edge and stare down into the depression. Sure enough, the crater is just big enough to house a few dark and dusty buildings, with 6 roads that lead down to meet in the small town center, where it appears a little market once was, with torn rugs and tattered tarps lining the outer edges of the square. Is it safe? Amber asks. Looks safe enough, Blaze hums, folding his arms. Let's see if we can take a small break here. Rest our legs and get ready for the last stretch of our journey. Ethan nods, though he continues to wear an agitated frown. Slowly, the group descend into the crater town of Praven, silence swirling around them. Blaze first, in case any trouble arises. Amber and Lucre next, the healer helping the prince navigate the slope. Ethan, quietly, brings up the rear. Pick a place? Blaze asks over his shoulder. Any being will do, Ethan replies flatly. That one! Lucre points to a nearby house towards the edge of town. No other suggestions or voice, so they all drift over to the one that the prince chose. Nearing the dark home, Blaze's legs begin to grow heavier by the step as he slowly realizes that he's far more tired from the walk than he thought he was. Shadows don't have all the stamina in the universe, apparently. The house is a single open room, with a stone table and small stools pushed up against one of the side walls, an ash-filled fire pit in the center, and 2 cots standing against the back wall. Very minimalist. Amber trudges over to the fire pit and, with a relieved sigh, drops right to her knees. Lucre somewhat does the same thing, though his legs fuse into a bright green tail instead, and he puffs a little to catch his breath. No doubt he's not used to all that walking they just did. Ethan pats Blaze's arm and nods towards the table. His arm buzzes pleasantly, and he does nothing to fight the sensation. A moment, Ethan says. Sure, Blaze nods. He drifts behind Ethan and plops down on one of the small stone stools. His legs throb happily, thanking him for the relief. Ethan brings one of the other stools around and places it next to Blaze, on his right. Judging from his determined expression, his mind is on something else besides having some sore legs. This'll sting, Ethan announces, reaching for Blaze's shoulder. That's enough to snap him out of his trance-like state. Panic surges through his body, and he leans away from his friend's outstretched hands, his shoulder jolting back behind his body. What do you mean, this'll sting? He exclaims. Ethan, what are you doing? Amber asks, though she doesn't sound all that interested in Blaze's panic. Ethan lets out a frustrated sigh. I'm just going to brand him, that's all, so he'll be less inclined to listen to Riona, or Shadow, or me. I don't need a brand, Blaze states firmly through gritted teeth. The flash of Ethan's cold scowl, sends a chill down Blaze's back instantly as his friend shifts on his stool. In an instant, it seems like he's become a completely different being. You trust me, don't you? He asks. Unsure as to where Ethan is going with this, Blaze can only bring himself to nod along. The spiritist raises a hand, pointing a single finger at the Shadow's chest. Pain. And with that one word, A sharp, stabbing pain erupts in Blaze's chest, right where Ethan points. He lets out a strained grunt as he hunches over, his hands clawing at his chest hopelessly. His mouth opens, but an airy squeal is the only thing he can produce. Even if I can cause you pain in my weakened state, imagine what Riona could do in the heat of the battle. The pain subsides, turning into a cold throb, and Blaze is allowed to catch his breath. With a wave of her hand, his friend continues coolly, "You could be rendered completely immobile and magicless. Or worse, she could force you to go against us, and you'll be unable to stop yourself." "And a brand will help?" Blaze asks skeptically, slowly sitting up straight again. Out of the corner of his eye, he can still see Ethan's empty, emotionless stare. "It's an unending instruction. If you're constantly being told to do something specific, then you're less inclined to follow another, unrelated instruction." Still, Blaze frowns in protest. "What are you going to brand me with, then?" Ethan's expression softens at the question, some semblance of emotion returning to his being. "A protector's brand, I'm thinking." "For who?" Ethan simply nods in the direction of Amber and Lucre, who stare at them in silence. "Better them than no being in particular," his friend replies, mustering a small smile. He lifts a hand, a finger already poised in the air and at the ready. "Roll up your sleeve." Reluctantly, Blaze complies, rolling his sleeve as high as it can go on his shoulder. Ethan leans forward and presses his fingertip against his shadowy skin. In an instant, a flare of burning pain springs from his touch, and Blaze grits his teeth and sucks in a sharp breath. He can practically track where Ethan's finger is against his skin, though he has no idea what symbol he may be ultimately drawing. All he knows is that it just hurts. After a moment, Ethan taps his arm, where it's colder. "I'm done." Blaze blinks and looks at him, his shoulders still on fire. It still feels like his friend has his finger on him as his new brand throbs. Ethan is sitting back on his stool, hands in his lap. Slowly, Blaze reaches for his shoulder and lightly touches the brand. A spike of sore pain shoots through his body, making him wince. "You probably shouldn't touch it for a little while," Ethan suggests. "Thanks." Blaze only grumbles back. He tries to roll his shoulder to work off the pain, but it only ends up causing even more of it to spread. He looks up at Amber and Lucre. The two still sit around the ashen fire pit, passing the spear back and forth between each other and chatting. A strong warmth fills his chest the longer he stares, a sensation he can only liken to an older sibling watching their younger siblings play. Ethan stands and fiddles with his clothes, brushing his robe for no reason, fixing his hat, and fiddling with the clasp of his cape to make sure it's still there. His hand eventually strays to his ruined gauntlet, and he begins to pick at the edges of the frayed fabric. From his dark expression, he appears anxious. "We should get moving soon," he says. "I don't want to still be on Corridon when it's like this when night falls." Blaze nods in agreement. While it'd probably help him and his magic, the others would be at a disadvantage. And yet... Hey, are you two ready to walk again? Amber and Lucre turn around. Maybe, the Cerberus mutters. I think so, Amber adds unsurely. Hey, Blaze speaks up in annoyance. Can I have a spell for my shoulder to heal a bit more? Ethan twists his gauntlets, expression conflicted. His hands appear to be shaking, his gaze lost in another reality. Blaze doesn't know what may be causing it, but Ethan is certainly in some sort of nervous stupor. You're not looking too great yourself, Blaze points out gently. Maybe you should go take a quick breather, Eth. Ethan lets out a shaky sigh. Yes, maybe. But I think it'd do you some good to clear your head a little bit before we get going, he suggests, so that you can think straighter. Another quivering breath, but this time Ethan nods. Sure. We'll be here, Blaze assures him with a small, encouraging smile. With a swish of his cape, Ethan steps outside into the empty town, leaving the other three behind in the dark house. Amber's stomach churns. He did seem rather nervous. She hopes he's doing all right. Blaze sucks in a breath as he shifts on his stool, his free hand gripping his upper arm hard, and his face twisting into uncomfortable pain. Amber tries to not pay him much mind, but his gaze is fixed on his new brand on his shoulder, rather than on her and Lucre. Still, she can't help but take note of his condition. Even if she dislikes him, she hates seeing another being in pain more. She doesn't know where this thought stems from, though. Maybe it's because she's a healer. Maybe it's something to do with her missing memories. Or maybe it's little bit of both. Lucre shifts next to her, drawing her attention. The tip of his tail waves at her lazily as he curls up on the floor, hugging himself to keep warm. His eyes hang half-closed, fighting to remain open. His sword rests on the ground next to him. Do you need to go on a walk too? Amber asks, forcing a light chuckle. Lucre smiles weakly as he lowers himself to the ground. Just rest. Amber just pats his shoulder awkwardly. And now it's just her and that shadow in the back still sitting around, wide awake with nothing to do. Amber turns to her spear and fiddles with it quietly. Spear's stab runs through her mind, a little something Lucre told her. They're not meant for waving around like a sword. They stab, and they can also be thrown. That's about the gist of it. You doing okay? Blaze asks. The cold makes him tired, Amber replies. The shadow chuckles. Guess Mirage is rather hot, then. She nods back. They have a sun that follows the cycle. It's warm when it's up, but cold when it disappears. Does the sky brighten and darken? Well, yeah. Amber bites in mild frustration. Why wouldn't it? I've never been to Mirage, Blaze replies calmly. She turns to him and states firmly, it's still a part of Astria. The shadow regards her small outburst with a vacant gaze. Hey, he sighs. I know you don't necessarily like me much. I don't. Amber curtly cuts him off, turning away from him. Anger swirls within her, only growing the more she engages with him. Right, the shadow mumbles. I just want to apologize. Amber breathes. I shouldn't have said all that. Blaze continues calmly. It was wrong to drag you into my plan in the first place anyway. Threats and insults aside. Amber remains silent, still somewhat fuming. After all, she won't just let go of what he did because he's a shadow now. It's still Blaze she's talking to. Yet, at the same time, he's got a point. He's not been rude or snarky with her at all since their meeting at Ica. He was even helping with the Fenny's tilling. That's not something the Blaze of a Sandra would have done. You don't have to accept it. The shadow carries on. I can't promise I'll be this way when I return to my body again either. But just know that, until then, I'll look out for you and Lucre as best I can. Amber just nods. She doesn't have anything more to say to the shadow. It's nice to know he'll be watching over her and Lucre, and yet she can't help but feel skeptical if all he's saying is true or not. Ethan finds a dark alley between two homes and takes a seat on the ground, inspecting his arm once again. He can't quell the sickness in his gut as he stares hopelessly at his ruined gauntlet. This isn't something he can simply try to stitch back together. The runes inside are damaged, and the magic of the enchantments are weakening. Even if the gauntlet stays together until the very end, its effects, the entire reason why he wears it in the first place, will be gone. And he can already start to feel it. A pull deep down inside of him, dragging him to the castle, even though he's already on his way there. But the longer he sits, the stronger the urge becomes to start moving again. Riona is calling him back. He clenches his hands into tight fists of frustration. What is he going to do if his other gauntlet gets damaged? What is he going to do if he lets his attention slip ever so slightly? His thoughts stray to Amber and Lucre. The last thing he wants to do is hurt them with his own two hands. He doesn't want to bring everything he cares about crashing down. The determination will keep him sane a little longer, but it's not going to last forever. He takes his gauntlet off. His arm prickles as it comes into contact with the cold air around him, as he shoves his gauntlet into his robe pocket with a reluctant sigh. He doesn't want it to fall off unexpectedly and lose it. When he returns to Asandra, he'll get it repaired. That's if you ever return, Riona's mocking voice hisses in the back of his head. This makes him stand in a rage. He will return to Asandra, and he'll return with Shadow this time around. He looks down at his bare wrist once more with a scowl. He's not used to seeing it without his gauntlet on. The others will note it as well if he were to return like this. He waves his other hand over his wrist, and in a puff of black smoke, a replacement appears. It has the same cuts and tears in the fabric, but without the enchantments of the real one. The others don't need to know that it's missing. Chapter 22. The group happens upon a low hill, and Ethan stops. Amber pauses mid-step to avoid running into him, almost tripping over herself. Her legs ache once again, and long for some rest, but she also knows she has no time to sit down now. She'll just have to deal with the aching for now. Eros should be just over this hill, Ethan announces, gesturing to the rise in the land. Can I sit? Lucre asks tiredly. No, you wouldn't be sitting for very long anyway, Ethan replies, sounding rather irritated. He's probably just stressed, being so close to his end goal. Amber would probably be the same way if she were him. There are quite a number of shadows waiting around, Blaze says. The place is surrounded by old farmland, so simply walking around it won't be an option if we want to get past without a fight. I do not wish to fight through them either, Ethan says. Not only would we lose much of our strength early on, but it gives Riona some time to watch us fight and prepare, or crush us before we can even reach the castle. She knows we're here, but she doesn't know where, I believe. He raises a hand to his forehead and closes his eyes. Our link hasn't come back, at any rate. We still have to get past Eros to get to the castle, though, Amber points out quite literally as she gestures with her spear. The group falls silent once again. Ethan's gaze is lost in thought, leaving Amber, Lucre, and Blaze standing around, aimless. Blaze lets out a confident hum, causing the other two to turn and look at him. Whatever happens, you two are in good hands. The shadow smiles at Amber, though he quickly turns to Lucre to include him in the moment. I'll make sure you two get back to Ica if anything comes up. Amber only nods in reply, unsure what else to say or do. Thank you. Lucre smiles back at the shadow weakly. He holds his sword a little firmer in his hand. I think I have a plan, Ethan suddenly announces. The other three turn back to the husk, waiting for him to relay his idea. He fiddles with his gauntlets for a moment and takes a slow, deep breath to calm himself. When he is ready, he looks up again and stares at the three with a suddenly cold gaze. Amber, Lucre, you're going to need to be tied up. In an instant, panic stabs at Amber's heart, and she inhales sharply, hugging her spear tight. Her heartbeat bounds in her ears as it leaps up into her throat. Be tied up? Why? Ethan! Lucre exclaims in a fury. Please, Ethan motions for him to settle down with a simple hand gesture. I know this is not what you wanted to hear, but there's no other way we can get past Eros unharmed. It won't be for very long, at least until we reach the castle. What specifically is your plan? Blaze asks coldly, folding his arms. Ethan's mouth opens soundlessly, his eyes partly widening as whatever spell came over him wears away, leaving him stunned. You're just going to have to trust me, he says eventually. He places a hand on his chest and composes himself the best he can. I want to make the shadows think that I want to return to Riona. It's already clear that Lucre is a target for her, but including Amber as well will make sure that both of you can get through. Amber and Lucre look at one another. His emerald eyes are dark and fearful, seeming as if he's going to start crying at any moment. His chest puffs in and out rapidly. Amber doesn't feel much better herself. Her heart sinks low as her chest continues to constrict with pain and unease. Is this really such a good idea? She's been with Ethan quite a lot the last couple of cycles, but she doesn't know what goes on in his head. And how do we know you're not just going to hand them over? Blaze steps forward, standing in front of the two protectively. The ground begins to shake under her feet, or at least she thinks she can feel vibrations below her. They're so faint she isn't completely sure. Come on, Blaze, you know me. I thought I knew you, the shadow replies harshly. It's the same tone he once used towards Amber, a tone that makes her heart ache. Now, I don't know what to think. Do you have a better plan? Ethan asks, his anxiousness quickly switching to defensive anger. The question appears to knock Blaze silent for a spell. No, he finally admits. I'm asking how we can trust you not to turn on us. Of course I don't want to go crawling back to her, Ethan exasperates. I've made too many promises to too many beings to... Amber steps forward, causing Ethan's voice to catch. Then can you make another one? She asks lightly. Ethan tilts his head ever so slightly in confusion. That you won't ever return to her? Ethan's shoulders sink as he sighs. After everything she's done? Of course I can promise that. Amber nods. It doesn't make her feel much better, but at least he seems like he means it. Then what do we do? The husk gives her a weak smile, if only for a short moment, and waves to Blaze. We can use your vines as bindings, at least around their mouths and chests. They still need to walk, of course. Blaze scowls unhappily, and yet two dark vines rise from the dirt without protest. Lucre's anxious gaze darts between the vine and Amber, looking for some sense of comfort. So she sucks in a sharp breath and stands a little taller. She's also worried, but she doesn't want Lucre to see it. He's already out of his depth as it is. Gently, the two vines approach and begin to wrap around their waists, snaking up their torsos and arms. Amber holds her spear close to her side to make sure it's not poking her or stuck to her awkwardly. She looks over at Lucre, who has his eyes closed and appears to be holding his breath as the vine wraps around his chest, pinning his arms and sword to his sides. And then the vine reaches her mouth, a single layer of shadowy plant matter that smells of dry earth. It presses against her lips so hard it keeps them pressed shut. Not like she wanted to open her mouth in the first place, or she'd taste the vine and probably not be very pleased. Ethan is back to messing with his gauntlets, pacing back and forth across the width of the pathway. Ethan? Blaze speaks up, irritation in his voice. Ethan looks up at the three, stares for a long moment with a gaze full of thoughts and emotions, and nods in satisfaction. And just walk behind them and stay silent, Ethan instructs Blaze. And look intimidating. Can we just go already? Yes, yes. The husk nods furiously. He runs a hand through his hair and looks to the hill, remaining unmoving. Amber remains standing, the vine hugging her body just tight enough to where it's not uncomfortable, but she can't shift around much either. She can't protest or comfort the husk. Part of her wants to tell him to get on with it, or to reassure him that the plan will work, or to even ask if they can just turn around and go back to Ica. But she's in the vine now. Ethan puts a foot forward, rolling his shoulders and fixing his hat. One last fidget. There's a push from the vine, an urge for Amber to walk, and she, too, puts her foot forward. She's marched over the crest of the hill, where she sees Eros ahead of them, along with the base of the castle beyond the buildings full of shadows. Even from the hill, she can see they're all large, much taller than her, and shaded in various blacks and dark grays. Her heart leaps and squeezes again, much harder this time. But all she can do now is walk forward to the very town that could possibly overwhelm them in an instant. Ethan's gut twists into nervous knots as he leads the march towards Eros. Despite his anxiousness, he keeps his expression cold. If he fails, he may as well have thrown them all over the side of the island. The twisted shadows wander the street ahead of him, aimless. It's sad to see such good shadows in such a state, and not even given a task to do. It's just meaningless suffering. His nervousness grows the closer they get, the hollow cavity in his chest swirling with it. Sometimes he wonders how other beings experience emotion, or if they feel it just as he does. A shadow finally turns its head. Its red eyes lock with Ethan's. Quiet and still, it just stares for what feels like centuries. Then it opens its mouth and lets out a screech. It's an otherworldly screech, echoing and raspy, something a regular shadow wouldn't even be able to produce. And it's not something he's used to hearing. All the other twisted shadows stop and turn, cluttering the street. If this were any other time, they'd stand aside and bow as he passed them. After all, he was, for a long time, Riona's advisor. But the screeching, the staring, the lack of movement, he feels deep down inside of him that something isn't right. He holds his head high as a twisted shadow pushes its way to the front of the pack and stands at the entrance to the town. It towers over Ethan, causing him to crane his neck to meet its gaze. He knows this twisted shadow all too well, even before it became twisted. This is the old leader of the town, before Riona came and took over. He was strict but fair to the Feni who lived here. Once becoming a shadow, he was still allowed to care for the town. And now, as if in insult, the twisted shadow before him wears a lavish garb fit for a town leader, yet is left without a town to lead. "Hello, Kaza," Ethan says flatly, focusing his energy into keeping his voice even and calm. He just has to uphold the act and, with any luck, they'll be allowed through without issue. You have nerve, husk. Kaza hisses back, cold and uncaring. Are you looking for death? No, Ethan replies carefully. Although, if that were to happen, would you be prepared to face the wrath of the lady's right hand? Kaza's face briefly contorts into that of alarm at the insinuation of facing off against Shadow, but he remains silent with his jaw clenched tightly. Ethan raises a hand to gesture to the company behind him, yet does nothing to acknowledge their presence beyond that. I merely bring gifts for the lady. Something dark and hateful stirs within him as he says this. He can hardly believe he used to talk and act this way regularly. In a way, he doesn't even need to fake anything. There is rumor you have forsaken the lady, the twisted shadow informs him, narrowing its eyes skeptically. There are some things she cannot get through her army. Ethan chuckles. I didn't intend for it to appear that I was working against her. I was merely taking a different approach. Does she not want the Prince of Mirage? Kaza lets out an airy huff of annoyance. She does. And the shadow she let slip through her fingers, does she not want him either? Blaze draws breath, but Ethan raises a hand to calm him. Kaza just stares at him quietly. Consider this my peace offering to her, and a symbol of my dedication, Ethan adds with a slight smile. Why should I suddenly turn on the lady after centuries we've spent together? Kaza points over his shoulder. Who is the girl? A being close to the council of Asandra, he replies smoothly. Amber isn't that close to Asna, but he certainly cares for his healers regardless. I figured she could be used as leverage against the wizards. And the shadow? He's under control. Don't worry. Again, Blaze inhales, but a little less sharply this time. And all are for the lady? If she's willing to take them? Silence. Kaza remains staring, but says nothing. The other twisted shadows are quiet and still as well, like statues. Amber, Lucre, and Blaze make no noise either, which makes Ethan want to turn and check to see if they're still standing behind him. Go, Kaza orders. The twisted shadow turns and waves at the crowd in a fashion that reminds Ethan of the old Kaza. A grand yet respectful gesture for the beings in his care to act. The crowd parts, a sight so familiar yet so foreign at the same time, revealing a straight path through Eros. Kaza also stands to the side, though continues to stare at Ethan intensely. Unfazed by their gazes, Ethan puffs out his chest and begins to walk down the corridor of twisted shadows, creating walls of black to his left and right, red eyes following him as he passes. Their gaze is only on him, the shadows completely disinterested in his entourage. These eyes are full of skepticism and impatience, maybe even hate. Has this always been here, and he never noticed? Or could it just be their temperaments from the cycles of having nothing to do? A dark thought begins to grow in the back of his mind as he strides deeper into Eros. He has Lucre and Amber at his complete mercy, and while Blaze is still somewhat of a free thinker, he can still be tricked and controlled to a certain extent. What's stopping him from simply returning to Riona? What's the point in fighting? He looks over his shoulder with his dead gaze. Amber and Lucre stare at him, their eyes just barely visible over the dark vines that are wrapped around the two. Blaze's gaze is distant and blank, almost like he's bored. And Kaza, to mild surprise, soundlessly trails them. He casts Kaza an awkward glare and turns back around to face forward once again. Eventually, he leads the four of them out of Eros, now on the path that leads straight to the castle that stands before them, its presence foreboding. The central spire towers in the sky, able to oversee the entire island and out into the void. It's also arguably the best spot to stargaze on any given night, though the clouds certainly don't help with improving the sky's visibility. Ethan? Kaza speaks, causing Ethan to stop and spin around. The twisted shadow shoves past Blaze, who casts daggers at the back of its head, and between Amber and Lucre, who stare at it uneasily. Kaza's expression, however, has gone from cold to troubled. Have you heard from the lady at all? Ethan folds his arms. No, I've not. She has not communicated with Eros for some years now, Kaza explains. The shadows have nothing to do and nowhere to go. There is the Mirage campaign, but she has been more obsessed with her new playthings. The twisted shadow spits the last word at the ground in distaste. Hearing a twisted shadow speak ill of Riona is new, but he can also see it happening with just enough resentment. Not even twisted shadows are perfect creations. Ethan just stares at Kaza, his thoughts swirling. Eros has the highest concentration of not only twisted shadows, but also shadows that have magic. So then why not use them for the Mirage campaign? That makes no sense. He can't help but mutter aloud. It makes no sense to me as well. Kaza nods. The others grow restless. If you truly are returning. He trails off with a hopeful note in his voice. Kaza. Ethan sighs heavily, feeling just a little sorry for the shadow. I'll see what I can do. This makes Kaza smile. It's a light one, relieved. Once again, something that shines through from the Kaza of old. The twisted shadow does a short bow, then turns and hurries back to Eros, back to the gathering of the other townsfolk. Ethan turns away from the town and looks at Blaze for a moment. The shadow stares back, along with Amber and Lucre, waiting for him to make his move. Come on, he says, waving to Blaze. Until the door of the castle. Amber lets out a deep sigh of relief as Blaze is finally allowed to untie her and Lucre. I hope it wasn't too uncomfortable for you, Ethan says with a slight smile. Amber stretches her arms and grips her spear firmly. Not very much. Next to her, Lucre also lets out a long stretch himself. They stand huddled up against the main entrance to the castle. She can see Eros below, at the bottom of the rather large hill the castle perches on, where the shadows mill about once again. You knew that shadow? She asks. Ethan nods with a solemn expression. Kaza was the leader of Eros, or still is by the looks of things. Is he not supposed to be? Ever since he became a twisted one, a lot of his authority was stripped away. Though, Ethan's eyes flashed with something troubled. Apparently, communication between Eros and Riona has been non-existent for quite a while now, so he seems to be keeping some sort of peace between the shadows. Any reason why? I don't know. He folds his arms and hums at the ground beneath him, his hat hiding his face. It's not only Eros that troubles me. Blaze, Kimberly, and Jake already seemed odd. The Mirage campaign is even stranger. Riona has been in contact with no other being other than me and Shadow, and the only being alive in Astria she'd probably be upset with is me. He trails off uneasily, and something in Amber's stomach drops. If the only being in Astria Riona would have an axe to grind with, is the same being who she's been spending the last couple of cycles with. I thought she was being rational. Ethan speaks once more, looking up again. His expression is dark, coming to a realization he probably never wanted to come to. I hoped she was being rational, but I've always been her main target. Taking away my friends, taking away places I can hide, and then bringing me back here to either be forced into submission or to be annihilated, or both. Heavy silence descends on the group. Amber holds her spear close to her chest, giving the husk a sympathetic look. All this effort just to ruin one being? And she used to be concerned about rumors only a handful of cycles ago. And speaking of rumors, she takes a deep breath. Ethan. Ethan looks at her with a dead gaze. She forces a small smile. I'm glad we met. The husk nods back at her, hope sparkling in his eyes. I'm glad we met, too. They stare at each other for a spell, not saying anything. She really is glad they met. Ethan didn't need to step up and watch out for her, yet he did so anyway. And she didn't need to stay with him when he wanted to come to Corridon, yet here she is. Eventually, he turns away from her, looking up at the door that stands before them. This door leads to a main entrance hall, he says, which will take us to the throne room. If the three of you can deal with the other shadows, I can handle Riona. Well, hopefully. Okay. Lucre nods. He sucks in a breath as if collecting his courage, holding his sword with a firm grip. Amber weighs her spear in her hands for a moment, her stomach fluttering nervously. She's a healer, not a fighter. So long as she stays out of harm's way, she can put herself to use if Lucre or Ethan get injured. Still... Ethan pushes the great doors open with minimal effort. The hinges creak and the wood groans as they are put into motion after probably a couple of years without much use or care. Funny, Ethan mutters as the dark entrance hall is illuminated by the dim light from the outside world. I used to oil these doors. What else did you do? Amber can't help but ask as the group take their first steps into the castle. A cold breeze rushes through the hall, blowing back her hair and sending chills up and down her spine. Lucre inhales sharply at the sudden chill and huddles close to Amber for warmth. She stretches an arm over his shoulder to give him a little more comfort. Oh, many things. Just to ensure that most of the castle wouldn't fall into disrepair. The husk chuckles weakly, voice echoing up and down the derelict hall. They pass unlit torches mounted to the walls, their wood rotting from centuries of not being replaced. Small stone doorways hang open, leading into side halls that wind their way deep into the castle, bathed in dark shadow. Though I couldn't do everything by myself, not even the shadows from Eros were allowed to enter and care for the place, and I didn't want the entire castle to crumble away due to neglect. After all, it was my home too, for a time. So big, Lucre comments quietly. Even I still get lost from time to time. Ethan reassures him, glancing over his shoulder just long enough to flash a strained grin. And then, inevitably, they reach the end of the hallway. A single small door stands in their way. Simple wood planks bound with metal bands and bolts. It's not the sort of entrance she was expecting to see for a throne room. Then again, the castle is rather old, so maybe the original door was replaced at some point. Or maybe this is what it has always been like. They've already passed the point of return long ago, but this really does feel like a last chance to turn around and run. Then again, there's a large part of Amber that does want to see the being that has forced Ethan into slavery for his entire life. At least once. All he's ever done is talk about Riona, but he's never really described her. Ethan takes a breath and reaches for the door, flames beginning to swirl around his arms. Amber lets Lucre go and takes hold of her spear, feeling far from ready for a fight. Whatever happens, she'll just have to make do and hope it works out. The moment his fingers touch the door, it explodes from its hinges and flies deep into the throne room. The time has come. And that is where we are going to stop for today. We will conclude Shadowbound tomorrow. We will be reading chapter 23 all the way to the epilogue. So, if you have been listening this much, or if you've been listening this far, and you would like to know how it ends, you can join me live on the 18th at 1 p.m. EST, same time as today. Just want to thank all of you for being here, like usual. It really does mean a lot, and especially if you've been here for all of the live streams up until now, following along in real time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Also be sure to thank Echo for her amazing art. So, thoughts, comments, questions, predictions, anything, now is the time to ask. As I take a sip of water. The chat is clapping for you, Echo. By the way. So, who of the group is the strongest? Like, currently, or if everyone was at their full power? Currently, yeah, I'll do both. Currently, it's Blaze by a long shot, and I think Lucre would be a hard second. And Amber and Ethan are kind of on the same playing field. They're strong in their own rights. Like, Blaze is not as good as healing as Amber, but Amber has, like, no combat skills. But if we're talking about like if the characters were at their full power, absolutely Ethan by a mile. Like there is no contest. Then again, Ethan is you know, a god or like a minor deity, I guess. He's not a god. He can't create things as permanently. What about everyone? Everyone's power level. You missed an L. Levez. Um, ooh, everyone's power level. Uh, so Ethan's pretty powerful. That's kind of been established already. Um, it's hard for me to pick between Blaze, Kim, and Jake, because they're all, again, like, they're powerful in their own rights. It all just kind of depends on what's going on and what they can and can't do. Like, Kimberly has this snow ability that other ice wizards don't have. And the the restrictions of ice magic is it has to originate from a surface, usually a wall or the ceiling or the floor. Demonstrated earlier in the book when Ethan made the ice pillars and when Kimberly made her snowman and gave it like ice buttons. However, snow doesn't quite follow the same logic. It's because, it's basically like it's like ice, but not exactly. Anyway, so it can shaved ice. Yeah. Uh so what she can use her snow for is she can create a couple different things, like, blizzards for one. That's kind of like the alternate title of the snow blessing is blizzard, but it's not used a whole lot because it's a very destructive form of the power. So yeah, of course, you don't really see it much. Uh but another thing she can do with it is she can make the snow be the base for her ice, which is how her shadow was able to basically fling these ice spikes at Ethan in the second act. And it's because she forms the ice from the snow base, and the snow doesn't need a base. So she can fling ice around at terrifying speeds. But, counter to that, like if she was up against Jake, Jake would probably have the edge there because he's fire, and he also has a sword, and he has a big area of effect with it if he knows how to use it correctly. Currently, he is lagging behind in his uh sword to magic skills. Like he knows how to use them individually, but not as well together. But, if he knew how to do it properly, he got held back. Oh boy. But if he knew how to use both his magic and his swordsmanship skills properly, he would just be wrecking entire like battlefields with ease. And then Blaze. You've seen a little bit of what Blaze can do. He can summon vines out of the ground. Not every life wizard knows how to do that. And they're basically like an extension of him. He can summon as many as he wants. He just needs to be able to, handle them all. Because it's kind of like splitting his consciousness in half every time he spawns another vine. So he can control them as a group, or he can control them individually. But he can't just spawn them anywhere. He needs dirt to do it, obviously. So if there's no dirt around, then no vine. So I'd say they're all, like, the three of them are kind of equal in power, assuming that, the playing field is neutral enough to where none of them really have one advantage or the other. Dirt man. Man loves his dirt. So it's hard for me to kind of say which of the three is like better than the other because they're all equally good. I guess if we were to say in terms of like where they are in Shadowbound, Blaze and Kim are at the top and Jake's just underneath. And then we got Lucre. He's good, not with his magic, but with his sword and stuff. Oh. Are you making a meme now? No dirt? Wow. Do you need to draw Blaze as Megamind or something? I don't know. That's something you can do later. Not now. Well, then it would make more sense. Yes. I'm not asking you to make him blue. I'm just saying you should draw him as Megamind so that the no dirt makes more sense. You don't have to. Dude, get back to work. So Lucre's just under the other three. And then it's Amber. Amber has no combat experience. Throw her into the middle of a battle and she's just like she'd run away from everything or die. I know it's not the end, but is there anything new or returning things we will see in the next book? Well, obviously, a lot of the characters. There will be new characters, of course. The second book is gonna be a little bit more of a. I hesitate to call it a more original story, even though it is. Because this Shadowbound has many anchors in Wizard 101, but yes, the second book will be more family focused. This is about friendship in a way, and learning that not all friendships are bad. Some friendships can be good, and it is important to have healthy friendships because Ethan and Riona's dynamic is partly inspired by some of my own experiences. And silly me, I did not want to acknowledge that until super late into writing the manuscript, so I had to retweak a couple of things to make it fit a little better. But once I came to accept that it was about me and some of my relationships, it made writing some of those parts a little easier. But then, yes, the second book's gonna be more family focused. It's not gonna be as rooted in Wizard 101 content. Like, aside from the world, it's a whole other adventure that these guys get to go on. And you'll be hearing a lot more from Kimberly and Jake. They are going to be a stronger focus in that book. Mommy Kim. Shadowbound Vin Diesel edition. Oh no. And oh yeah, you'll also get to see some of the other islands too. Gardal and Kendon, which have only been mentioned in this book so far. You'll actually go there and see a little bit of what they're like too, and get more of the characters' thoughts on the beings that live there. So really expanding the scope, but not too much. It's the whole, like, you can have world ending stakes or whatever, but the most important part of the story is the personal character uh, stuff that goes on. It's like, how do I describe this? I don't think it's necessarily good enough just to have the world end for the sake of there being a plot. If you can get the characters personally invested, and, the readers by proxy, personally invested in the fate of the world, that makes it a lot more intriguing, intense. Because it's not just like, oh, here's a world and now it's going to end and these characters need to stop it. It's like, the world's going to end, but these characters are currently struggling with their own personal stuff. And then somehow it ties back into the world ending, and now there's a dilemma. Now there's personal stakes involved in the world ending. The world isn't just gonna, end and it's like, well, I like living in this world. It's like, no, I want to find my dad. I want to go rediscover Atlantis. I want to, I want to do this or that or the other thing. Dad left. Oof. He went to go get the milk, and now the world is ending. Quickly, we must help him complete his mission. Though, oh no, the Megamind meme. No, Dad. Bottom text. Oh, and also, Shadow. Shadow will also be heard from a lot more too. Though, in what capacity? I won't say. I'll never tell until I actually publish the book. So, that's a little bit of what to expect from the upcoming sequel, which, by the way, have been working on it. Not as much as I've been wanting to, but any progress is good progress. Shadow, yes, Ethan's Ethan's brother, I guess. That's like the only way I can describe the two. Is they're like brothers. How do they travel between worlds? I missed that part. Sorry. Okay, so the traveling between the different islands is by an archway. And the archway, it's covered in all sorts of runes and stuff. And if you need to take a moment, go right on ahead. Anyway, so you need a keystone to have the archway even work. So there's like, runes on the archway that reads the enchantments on the keystone, and then it will open up a rift in space and time to take you to the other archway on that island. And they're really big, and the keystones are really small. Think like, big enough to fit into the palm of your hand, so to speak, and they're like an oval, they're smooth, and each keystone, it looks a little different and acts a little different. Obviously, like a white stone will take you to Asandra, a gray stone will take you to Corridon, a cream one takes you to Mirage. Um, there's another stone that goes to Solari, which is like a fragment of Mirage, but it's a different archway, so it needs its own keystone. There's one that takes you to Gardal. I think that one's blue. And then the Kendon one is red. And they each got a little symbol on them that does a special thing so that the archway knows, hey, this person wants to go to, from Asandra to Gardal, and then it will take you to Gardal. However, once the person with the rune with the keystone steps through the archway, the rift closes. So if you're traveling as a group, first of all, you want to make sure that you give everyone in your group a good pat, because that's like, a way to attune yourself to the stone or whatever. Or if it's just like you and your group of friends and no one else is around, it'll just kind of like open the rift and be like, hey, y'all want to go through? If you don't want to go through, you want to go somewhere else, you got to take out a keystone of your own. And then, all of your friends need to go through first, and then you need to go through last, because otherwise the rift will close, and you don't want the rift to close on anyone. It will never close on someone. That would just be messy. But it will close when the last person is through. Like, if you've played Wizard 101, think the world doors and the world keys, but it's not a door, it's just a big stone archway, and your key is another rock. You get drunk one night and end up on a different island. Oh. A random rift is open, you walk right through. Oh boy, if you end up on Kendon, you'd probably wind up in jail. How many pages do we have left? I don't know how many chapters are left. 40 pages. We have 40 pages left in the book. We've been reading anywhere between, like 35 to 60-ish pages per reading. Today was only 36 pages. Any other questions, comments, predictions, theories to throw my way? Echo is speed trying, you got her on double time. Well, I did warn her that we only had about a little over an hour. And she's also taking the time to, go off to the side and write little words on the screen. Slowing herself down. I guess here's something I can comment on. Well, two things actually. Number one, there have been two instances in the book now. I noted one earlier, and then I ran into another one in this reading, where Lucre is not referred to as Lucre, but instead by his nickname, Luke. However, only one instance is incorrect. And there is, I want to say, a few instances where he is also referred to as Lucre, and that is also incorrect. And I will leave all of you to speculate which is correct and which isn't. A few instances. And this is all to do with the POV, because I don't know if you guys noticed, but Lucre uses very different terms for things when we're in his POV. But then when we're in, like, Amber or Ethan's POV, they use different terms for that. And there's one instance where he's called Luke incorrectly, and there is one POV where he's called Lucre incorrectly. And part of that was I kind of forgot. I too forget things. So that was very much an accident, but funny little accident. I will let you all figure out what is right and what is wrong. Amber and Ethan's interactions are so cute. Yeah, I tried to make him a little more, like, whether or not it's setting up any sort of ship or whatever, that's up to you. But I definitely wanted to, at least this far into the book, like, give him a little bit more, like, Gotta cut Ethan some slack because he's in a stressful situation, and Amber's totally out of her depth, and the only thing she feels like she can do is give people comfort. Like, now is not the time to be getting bitter about the people that any of them are traveling with except for if it's Blaze and Amber. Amber is still kind of iffy about Blaze, but that's understandable. Everyone else, it's like, I might as well be nice because I won't be helpful if I'm mean. Though the other thing that I wanted to comment on is I didn't read it how it was written. There are some times where I don't read the book like how I wrote it very few times. Some of it's just me glossing over spelling mistakes and stuff. Sometimes it's me uh, getting too far ahead of myself, so I don't want to like ruin things. So I just kind of roll with whatever my mouth is saying. So it's not exactly like how it was written in the book, but I want to try and keep it as close as possible. Kaza is actually the only Twisted Shadow on accident that uses contractions. Where where did he say it? I'm trying to find it again. Because Twisted Shadows are not meant to use contractions, and I missed this. There. So the line where he used a contraction is she's not communicated with Eros for some years now. There is the Mirage campaign, but she's been more obsessed with her new playthings. Those are the two times he's used contractions. Again, on accident, but I think this is just like a funny little thing that it's like this man suddenly has the ability to use contractions where no other shadow can. And of course, a lot of this I caught after I published the book. But of course, I'm not just gonna go back and update the manuscript, or at least not the physical print manuscripts, because I've already printed and sold a bunch of the books already with the errors in it, so might as well. Plot twist causes the most powerful out of everyone in the cast. Well, hmm. Don't give me any ideas. I don't know if he's ever gonna come back. Kaza's always been kind of a minor character. I'll talk about him a little bit. Uh, so in the old draft, I want to say he was in it a little bit too, in the same capacity. He was a shadow under Riona's control. Yada yada yada. But then in the second book, which I wrote a whole manuscript for, mind you, so if I really want to say that the book is done, I can. However, that old draft is A, old, and B, totally out of date because all of the world mechanics are different, and how the book starts, it relates to how the old draft of Shadowbound ended, and it wouldn't make sense. So, the sequel is not done, but I do have a completed draft of it. Anyway, he appeared in the old draft of the sequel in a little bit more of an official capacity. He is the leader of Eros. He is in charge of the caretakers that watch over the castle and care for it in its old age. Because, of course, this ancient relic should not be, brought to ruin by that which is called time. Like, the people here have a very high respect for all of their history and ancient artifacts, if you haven't noticed already. And so he was a little bit more involved, still a minor side character. Anyway, I still used him for Shadowbound here, just kind of as a just another shadow that Ethan knows. And it's kind of the same thing with Tatcha. Like, Tatcha was in the second book's first manuscript a little bit more. Like, she was a little bit more important as the leader of Corridon. But, it's like, even if I don't use these characters again, I still wanted to make the world feel a little more lived in. Like, Ethan actually knows some of the shadows, and he wasn't just cooped up in the castle the entire time. Like, he actually got to know some of the townsfolk and, probably befriended some of them at some point in his past. Because it would be weird if you just kind of walked through Corridon and didn't recognize anyone. Because that would just be sad. And he'd be a sad boy. He is kind of a sad boy, but not like that. Aww. Don't be sad. Yay! So are people excited for tomorrow? To hear how Shadowbound ends? Well, I know you are. You kind of have to be there. Oh, Shadow Boy's sad. He's not that sad. He just has trouble with emotions. Which, by the way, Ethan will still be somewhat important in the second book, too. No happy, all sad. Like, despite all that's going on and all the different POVs and stuff, I would definitely say this is very much Ethan's trilogy. He has a lot going on. But it's not just about him, it's about his friends that are around him too. Like, he's not the only character. Shocking, I know. And we're finally going to get to see Riona. Like, actually see her. I hope you're all ready to see what the evil queen looks like. anything else. I don't wanna draw toes. Brick feet. Okay. I'm not gonna force you. You always draw him with brick feet. Everyone, yes. Well, look, the difference is they have shoes on. He has sandals. Get back to drawing. I'll say I'm excited. I mean, of course I'm excited. But I'm very excited. This has been fun. I know I've probably said this before in the other readings, but this is very fun. And I've been greatly enjoying interacting with all of you. Any other questions, comments, predictions, thoughts? Stuff you want me to ask about, give a little history on? Otherwise, I might draw this to a close. History of Blaze? You just want a general history of Blaze. Okay, I guess I could give a general history of Blaze. So, I believe I've mentioned this before, but Blaze started as an insert for a YouTuber called Blaze Lifehammer, who I believe recently returned to content creation as of July 17th, 2024. And originally he was a massive jerk. Like, he was only a YouTuber insert in name alone, and also Magic School, because his primary wizard is a life wizard, which is why I made Amber, because I was basically copying him. So if it weren't for him, Amber wouldn't exist. Well, okay, I was kind of copying him. I was also copying a different friend of mine who got me into the game a while ago. Her main was also a life wizard, and she introduced me to Blaze. And you know, Blaze's main was also a life wizard, so I'm like, I'm gonna be a life wizard. And then I realized how much of a struggle it is to solo as a life wizard because no one wanted to play with me, which made me sad. But anyway, so he was only an insert in name alone. Otherwise, he was totally out of character, like his own thing right out the gate. He was a massive jerk. He did not like anyone. It was also, like, back in the day, Shadowbound was a little bit more like, I don't want to say an ordinary, which is a webtoon. Which I don't really want to get into explaining right now. But No, it was like, if people know My Hero Academia, An Ordinary is kind of like that, but it's a teen drama and also worse, in my personal opinion. Um, I I want to say part of it was there's this list, or I might be thinking about Solo Leveling, and I'm conflating the two. Anyway, it's either Solo Leveling or An Ordinary, which Solo Leveling is more of a you can say it's like MHA, where there are these people with superpowers and stuff, and they go into these rifts and fight monsters, and the protagonist gets access to this video game like system that allows him to level up indefinitely. Um, but I remember reading something somewhere that was about superpowered individuals, and there was a list involved. And the list was like the top however many people. Isn't that the gamer? The gamer's more oh my, look at me talking about webtoons and mangas and stuff. No, no, no. The gamer, that that was, I don't think there was a list involved in that one. It's very similar to Solo Leveling, where this kid is given video game powers and he becomes a mage. Solo Leveling, he was more like a mage assassin. He was a necromancer. He wound up being a necromancer, but he was more like an assassin. An Ordinary is just bland. Um. Anyway, so I read something around that time, and it had like this power list involved about all the various different individuals, like the top 100 or something. And I really liked that idea, so I worked it into the story. And so it was the list of all of the most powerful wizards in Wizard City, because this was still a Wizard 101 fanfic, so of course I was using Wizard 101 terms at the time. And I want to say Blaze was number one, Ethan was number two. Ethan, that was back when Ethan had his trash girlfriend, and she was like number three or four. And Kimberly was the other one, either three or four. I think she was three. The trash girlfriend was four. Jake was five. Well, back then he wasn't called Jake, he was called Ethan. And Ethan was called Blue. Um, and then Amber was like all the way at the bottom of the list. She didn't care for anyone, but Blaze was like so gung ho about it, to the point where if you weren't within the top 5 or top 10, he wouldn't talk to you. And he would treat you like trash. Like you were beneath him. So that was how his character started. And then it evolved more into, because I got rid of the list idea because the list idea was not working the way I wanted to. Um, it it became more like he developed a grudge against first and second term wizards rather than just a general hatred for everyone that was not as OP as him. And that was because some first and second terms were had bullied Kim at some point about her ice cream shop, and so she was too nice to do anything about it, so he stepped in and basically scared everyone away, and then that's how he got his reputation. So when Amber comes along, he doesn't like Amber because Amber's a first term, and in his experience, all first and second terms are evil. So that that happened. And now it's not even that. It's a little more complicated than that. But it's not necessarily like he hates her. It's more he hated the fact that she was there at that specific time. You know, of course, he has his doubts about her, his skepticisms. He doesn't completely trust her. But if it were under any other circumstance, I have a feeling that he wouldn't have minded Amber being at the shop at all. It's just that's how it played out. So he just doesn't like Amber. Amber is the only problem in his life. Though I will say that he is his magic, his abilities, how he functions, that hasn't changed at all. It's just been his personality and character motivations. And that's the history of Blaze. And he's still called Blaze, even to this day. And, like, I love my dad. He read the old draft of Shadowbound and he's like, can't you change Blaze's name? Because, you know, Blaze sounds like the name of a fire wizard. I'm like, yeah. But it kind of stuck already. So, you know, if I change the name, like, Blaze wouldn't be Blaze anymore. He would be some other character. And I didn't want to just make another character. I already had a character made. I didn't want to put in all that work just to rework him. Lazy? Yes, I was lazy because Blaze has been part of the story for so long that it's like you're asking me to basically kill my own, you know, baby, my child, my boy. Don't take him away. Anyway, brief history of Blaze. Yeah, that's really about it. There was like a very early incarnation where Blaze didn't even exist, but I scrapped that so fast. So fast. That was just cringe. We don't talk about it. The the maid? Uh I think I think so. Yeah, with the meteor and the Tinkerbell like you know, choose your own magic man. That one didn't have Blaze in it. Or Kim, or Jake. There was a life wizard and a fire wizard and an ice wizard, but they weren't Blaze, Kim, or Jake, or Ethan. There was a death wizard, but it wasn't Ethan. And I guess also fun fact: for the longest time, Ethan's name wasn't Ethan; it was Blue, and Jake's name was Ethan. But then, you know, I thought about it and it's like, Blue doesn't really make sense. So I'm gonna change it. And Ethan just seemed to fit him better than it did Jake. So I was like, okay, well, now I have an Ethan, but I don't want there to be two Ethans. So I'm just gonna call you Jake. And that's how Jake was born. I wish it were all that simple. But Luke's always been there from the start. He's actually the oldest character aside from Amber. Kind of funny to think about it. The olds. Yup. Oh, if only they were in Wizard 101. Actually, probably not. Uh, anything else? Anyone have anything else they want to hear about that I can comment on? More Blaze? More Blaze facts. Uh, dude, if I gave you any more, I'd be getting into spoilers. Uh, are there any random Blaze facts that I can give? Um, no, I don't think so. Yeah, no, all you know about him right now is all you're gonna get. As this Faith collection. Oh, um, yeah. So Asna has some really funky pants, y'all. That is canon. He really likes funky pants. Though, uh, I didn't mention any of them in the book because it was established after the book was published. So I couldn't go back and change anything. But he has a pants collection. Yeah, next book you'll get to see maybe one or two funky pants. Fanky pants. I mean, hey, the wizard of his age needs to have a hobby to keep himself sane, dealing with death and life and saving life and experiencing death and all that for stars only know how long. Pop, that was my knee. Sorry about that. Well, okay, since Echo's asking for character facts. Uh I could give a bit of history on some of the others too. Ethan, there's not a whole lot to Ethan. Ethan's been largely unchanged from when he was introduced all the way back then as Blue until now. It's just the mechanics behind him have changed. Shadow has always been a part of him, just in different ways. But it never really seemed to work. At least, not until I wrote Shadowbound, what I am reading to all of you. This just seemed like the best way for it to work. Amber started out as a little self-insert prick. And now she's not. Oh, she's also not as OP. Like beforehand, she had all the magic at her fingertips, and now she has none of the magic at her fingertips. She can just heal people and make sparkles. And that's about it. Jake, as I mentioned before, he started out as a character called Ethan. Forget his last name. He had a last name. It was probably something like Ethan Icebreaker. You know, something cool and edgy like that. And he was super buff, and he had a giant hammer, and his whole thing was he went around and smashed stuff with his hammer. Well, when I renamed him to Jake, A, I got rid of his last name, and B, I got rid of the hammer, because it didn't make sense anymore. So I definitely toned him down a bit. Because he was supposed to be like the strong, like physically strong yet goofy guy of the group. Also the tank. Uh, Tank Matt EBF. Yeah. I guess you could say he was a little bit like Matt from Epic Battle Fantasy, but not as criminal. And him and Kim were in a loving relationship, but I yeah, I in some ways I toned him down, and in other ways I dialed him up. Like I went all in on the goofy yet caring side rather than like a, you know, cool hero that's always out and about and he comes home to a lovely girlfriend and he cracks jokes with her and stuff like that. No, he's just he's more aloof than he used to be. And that change was very easy to do because it just fit him more than what I was trying to do with him initially, which sucked. Obviously, because I got rid of it really fast. Kimberly, she did not own an ice cream shop. She used to work at a coffee shop as a waitress, and she was also disabled. But she was only disabled because I thought it would make her cooler. Like, she's a retired hero that, like, lost her leg and got her arm paralyzed. So she uses magic to move her paralyzed arm around, and she has a prosthetic leg that, you couldn't really tell that it was a prosthetic leg. So it was basically like, you know, she's disabled, but she's also a normal person like you and me. And I kind of looked at that and was like, that's not... Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't add anything to her character. And it's also a little insensitive. So, either I'm going to make her disabled and it's going to affect her character, or I'm not going to make her disabled and I'm going to do something else. So, I made her not disabled and I did something else. Because at the time, I had no idea how to write a character with a physical disability like that. Nowadays, I think I could, but back then, nah, I wasn't skilled enough. Nor sensitive enough. Yeah, it's kind of like I did a lot of things because I thought it was cool, and I didn't really stop and think about everything else. Very apparent by the fact that Kimberly was disabled, but not really. So she went from being a waitress at a coffee shop who apparently had a missing leg and a paralyzed arm, to the owner of an ice cream shop and among some of the most powerful wizards in Cassandra, currently alive. And not to say that she doesn't have her own struggles. She still has her own struggles. Now she's gonna get PTSD. Oh boy. We all love PTSD, don't we? But it's just like, dude, I was not happy with old Kim. And I believe I mentioned this before. Old Kim was really only made to be a friend of Amber, and then Jake only existed to give Kimberly a little bit more depth. So they didn't really have a whole lot going on back then as they do now. And I'm happy I made the changes that I did, because oh boy. Luke, I think, already covered. He started off as a prick and now he's not. But like I also said, he's uh one of the more OG wizards, the other one being Amber. And then everyone else kind of came after them. Because when Amber was in Mirage, she needed someone to look out for her because she wasn't supposed to be there. So I made Luke. And I don't know, he was always a royal. There was a period of time where I was thinking, maybe he's not a royal, but then it's like, no, I think royalty kind of fits him better. So he was almost a peasant in an iteration, but he never became one. A man has always lived in luxury. Relatively. And Luke's mom too. Her name is actually Queen Aisha. That's her name. Pampered, absolutely. So her name is Aisha, and she's also been around for ages. It's just I never put a name to her up until I started actually writing Shadowbound. And then it was like, well, I don't just want to call her Luke's mom or the queen. I want to actually give her a name because I did make her important. Um, Not in the old draft of Shadowbound, but she had, and she still has a little bit more importance in the sequel too. So expect to see her again as well. Uh, yeah, so she's always been around, and she's always been without a husband. Of course, uh, there's only so much I can speak about that right now with the second book still in production. So I don't want to again spoil anything, but uh the reasons as to why she was unmarried slash didn't have a husband, they've changed throughout the iterations. In the very first iteration, it's very similar to uh the angle that I'm kind of trying to go for now, in which uh she was married, but then the quote unquote king just upped and abandoned her. But that was also back when he actually stuck around enough for Luke to actually know who his dad was, and His dad wasn't anyone special. I just, for whatever reason, didn't want to write about him. So it's just like, yeah, he just ups and leaves the family. And Luke is not bothered by that at all. The queen was bothered by it, sure, but not Luke. So, and then it changed and it changed, and now I'm kind of back to that whole, um, oh, maybe she was abandoned, but why? Uh, and I'm still like trying to iron out some of the kinks in it, but yeah. There you go. A little bit about Luke's mom. Hey, good drawing. Yay. Well, if no one has any other questions, comments, predictions, what have you, I think I'm going to wrap up the reading here. Thank you all once again for being here. If you're live, thank you for listening live. If you are from the future, hello future. Thank you for being here as well and listening to my ramblings. Uh if you have enjoyed the reading so far, I know we're almost at the end of the book, but you can always buy the book if you would like to support the channel and my authoring journey. Once again, there is a link in the description below or in the pinned chat message. I would greatly appreciate it if you do buy yourself a copy to leave a review on the Amazon store page. That is how people find the book and, you know, trust to read it. And oh yes, if you have not thanked Echo already, if you're in the live chat, please, excuse me, please do so now. She has done a wondrous job. And she will be drawing one last picture for tomorrow's reading as well. If you want to come and join live, it will be again tomorrow at 1 p.m. EST. I hope that you will come for the finale, because why would you stop here? So close to the end. Ooh. So I hope you all have an amazing time zone. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.